Imagine being 6 years old, and instead of learning your letters, you are taught how to bow to foreign nobles. Instead of playing in palace gardens, you are dressed in jewels heavy enough to bruise your small shoulders. And instead of choosing your own future, a crown is placed on your head and a wedding ring on your finger. This is the story of Isabel of Valois, a child bride, a political pawn, and one of England's most forgotten queens. She was married at 6, widowed at 10, dead at 20. Her voice was barely heard in life. Let us give it back to her now. Isabel was born in 1389 into the glittering yet deeply unstable court of Charles VI of France and Isabeau of Bavaria. Her father, Charles VI, was known first as Charles the Beloved. Handsome, charismatic, and crowned young, he seemed every inch the Golden King. But beneath the surface, something terrifying lurked. Beginning in his 20s, Charles suffered from severe bouts of mental illness. At times he believed he was made of glass. At others, he failed to recognize his own wife and children. During one infamous episode, he attacked members of his own escort in a paranoid frenzy. France, already strained by the long conflict with England known as the 100 Years' War, trembled under the instability of a king whose mind could not be trusted. Her mother, Isabeau of Bavaria, was politically sharp and often vilified by later historians. In truth, she governed during her husband's episodes of incapacity, navigating factions that tore France apart. The royal court was divided between powerful noble houses, particularly the Burgundians and the Armagnacs. Conspiracies were constant, alliances shifted like sand. This was the world Isabel was born into, glittering on the outside, fractured at its core. Though surrounded by luxury, Isabel's childhood was not free. Royal children were raised not as individuals, but as future bargaining chips. Tutors, governesses, and attendants shaped her for diplomacy. She learned courtly manners, religious devotion, and the art of silent obedience. She would have played in the gardens of the Louvre Palace, dressed in silk miniatures of adult gowns, but even her laughter existed under watchful eyes. Across the Channel, England was also unstable. Its king, Richard II of England, faced rebellion from his nobles. He had no heir. His marriage to Anne of Bohemia had produced no children, and her death in 1394 left him grieving and politically vulnerable. Peace between England and France was desperately needed. War drained both kingdoms. Negotiators searched for a solution, and they found it in a child. In 1396, diplomats drafted a treaty between France and England. At its heart was a proposal. 6-year-old Isabel would marry the 29-year-old King Richard II. To modern ears, it is horrifying. To medieval rulers, it was strategy. The agreement promised a 28-year truce in the 100 Years' War. Isabel's dowry was immense. In return, Richard would grant her lands and status befitting a queen. Importantly, the marriage would not be consummated until she was older. But legal protections did not erase emotional reality. Isabel likely did not understand what marriage meant. She knew only that she was leaving home. The farewell must have been devastating. In October 1396, Isabel crossed into English-controlled territory near Calais. Chroniclers describe her dressed magnificently, tiny and solemn. Richard met her with elaborate ceremony. He reportedly lifted her into his arms and kissed her gently, declaring he was delighted with his bride. Some accounts suggest Richard treated her with unusual kindness. He ensured she was educated properly and surrounded by French attendants. He did not force immediate cohabitation, but kindness does not erase displacement. Imagine being 6, taken from your mother, transported to a foreign land whose language you barely speak. The English court was colder in climate and temperament. Politics simmered beneath every smile. She was crowned Queen of England at Westminster Abbey in 1397. The crown placed upon her small head symbolized peace between nations, but also the weight of expectation. Though technically married, Isabel and Richard lived largely separate lives due to her age. She resided in royal castles including Windsor and Wallingford, carefully supervised. Richard visited her, gave her gifts, and seemed proud of her. Some historians believe he was genuinely fond of her, perhaps seeing in her a symbol of renewal after grief. Yet England was growing restless. Richard's rule had become increasingly autocratic. He punished nobles who opposed him. Taxes were heavy. Resentment brewed, particularly from his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Isabel, still a child, stood at the center of a political storm she could neither see nor understand. Contrary to dramatic legend, there was no violent consummation in her childhood. The treaty explicitly delayed it. However, fear must have existed. Medieval girls understood their duty, eventually included producing heirs. Growing older in a foreign court, Isabel would have been aware of whispers of rebellion, of plots, and then in 1399, everything collapsed. While Richard campaigned in Ireland, Henry Bolingbroke invaded England. Support for Richard evaporated quickly. He was captured, forced to abdicate, and imprisoned in Pontefract Castle. Isabel was 10 years old. Imagine the terror courtiers rushing, loyalty shifting overnight. The king who had lifted you in his arms was now a prisoner. Richard II died in early 1400 under mysterious circumstances, likely starvation or murder. He was 33. Isabel was widowed at 10. Henry Bolingbroke crowned himself as Henry IV of England. Isabel was now the child widow of a deposed king. Henry proposed she marry his son, the future Henry V of England, as a way to solidify legitimacy. She refused. At just 10 years old, Isabel reportedly declared she wished to return to France. Whether those were truly her words or shaped by French negotiators, the sentiment was clear: she would not be used again so easily. After tense negotiations, she was allowed to go home in 1401. Returning to France was not a fairy tale reunion. The political climate had worsened. Her father's mental illness continued. Factional violence between Burgundians and Armagnacs intensified. But Isabel was no longer a child bride. She had seen deposition, betrayal, and imprisonment. She had been Queen of England. That experience changed her. Chroniclers suggest she carried herself with dignity and maturity beyond her years. She had known isolation in England. Now she navigated a fractured France. In 1406, at 17, Isabel married Charles of Orléans, a prince of the blood and one of France's most prominent nobles. Unlike her first marriage, this union offered the possibility of companionship. Charles of Orléans was closer to her age, cultured and poetic. There may have been genuine affection, but peace did not follow. France spiraled toward civil war. In 1407, Charles's father Louis of Orléans was assassinated by agents of the Duke of Burgundy, igniting open conflict. Isabel once again stood in the shadow of violence. In 1409, at just 20 years old, Isabel died after childbirth. Her daughter Joan of Orléans survived. Isabel did not. 20 years. She had been a queen, a widow, a political symbol, yet barely an adult. Her body was laid to rest at the Abbey of Saint Denis, the burial place of French royalty. Her life, though short, had crossed kingdoms and altered diplomacy. Isabel of Valois is often a footnote in English history, remembered mainly as Richard II's child bride. But her life reflects the brutal reality of medieval diplomacy. She was born into instability under a father battling madness and a kingdom at war. She was married to secure peace. She was widowed in a coup. She returned home only to enter another turbulent marriage. And she died before reaching full womanhood. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about royal childhood. Crowns did not protect children. Silk did not soften exile. Marriage was not romance, it was policy. Yet within those constraints, Isabel showed quiet resilience. She refused a second English marriage. She navigated 2 courts. She endured loss without recorded scandal or rebellion. She had almost no voice in chronicles written by men focused on kings and battles. But imagine her inner world: a 6-year-old leaving her mother's arms, a 10-year-old hearing her husband is dead, a 17-year-old bride again, hoping perhaps for stability, a 20-year-old mother who never lived to see her child grow. History often remembers conquerors and warriors. Isabel left no armies, no decrees. What she left instead is something subtler, a reminder of the human cost behind treaties and thrones. She was married at 6, crowned before she could write her name, widowed before she understood marriage, and gone before she truly began to live. England once called her queen, France called her daughter, but perhaps today we can call her something else, a child who deserved more than history gave her. If you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard, subscribe and join me for more stories where history isn't just about crowns and kings, but about the lives hidden beneath them.